Mini cut isn't just about like losing body fat. It's actually about guiding your future muscle growth goals. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Truth Talks, the podcast that brings you real strategies for sustainable fitness transformation. I'm Courtney, and this is my brother, Paris, and we are here to guide you along your own fitness transformation. So today, we are talking about mini cuts. Some people might be familiar with the term, some people might not. Coach Steve on our team said in our team chat, he said, hey, yeah, I'm in this like mini cut phase right now. It's going really well. And one of our clients said, hey, what is that? What is a mini cut? And we're like, oh, we should talk about that.
I think people either don't know what it is or they misinterpret what it is. So
I would even argue that the misinterpretation might even be more common in a lot of circles.
Yes. Like they'll say like, oh, this is a mini cut. It's like, well, it doesn't really fit the bill. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So
yeah. We're going to add some clarity. So when you hear the term mini cut, if you're hearing it for the first time today, or if you've heard it before and just aren't that sure about it, or even if you feel confident, we're still here to give you the truth. We're going to talk about what a mini cut actually is. We're going to define it for you. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how they're structured to make them actually productive and fulfill their intention, the benefits of mini cuts, why people even take them, and then also a little bit about like who they're for and who they're not for, because to actually take proper advantage of them, there are some criteria we think is important to outline. And then before we wrap things up, we'll just cover off a couple of common mistakes or watchouts around mini cuts to make sure you're deploying them properly. And as always, we like to end with a little bit of a mindset shift. Paris, how does that sound to you?
I think that sounds great.
Alrighty. Do you want to kick things off with like defining a mini cut? Let's answer the question. What is a mini cut?
Yeah. So a mini cut is a short and I like to say assertive fat loss phase that usually lasts anywhere between, honestly, like 4 to 8 weeks, typically 8 weeks max. But usually I would say more commonly around that 4 to 6 week period. And the goal is to be very assertive in getting a lot of body fat off in a short period of time.
Right. It's really interesting that we differentiate mini cuts from other fat loss phases, because typically what we advocate for with clients who have long-term fat loss goals is like longer timeline, sustainable approach, slower rate of loss, right? So a mini cut is not necessarily meant to be for, lifestyle fat loss where there's a lot of weight to lose, because like you said, it's assertive and it's short term. But as we distinguish it from a longer fat loss phase, where you're maybe making sustainable habit changes and you're focusing on seeing progress over a longer time horizon, we also need to clarify that mini cuts are not crash diets. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you said you like the term assertive. And I really like that you said that, because you didn't say aggressive or restrictive.
Yeah.
So can we actually just like explain the difference, why it's not a crash diet for a second?
I think it's more the mindset around it. Like a mini cut is not supposed to, again, be a long-term fat loss journey type situation. It's also not for people that are trying to get very lean, and it's not for people that are trying to lose a whole lot of weight. Okay. And when we use the term like aggressive or crash dieting, it's just purely like a lot of it's based on the difference in mindset, or like the goal is not to try to just lose as much weight as quickly as possible and keep going until we give up. It's a short, specific time frame, or being assertive and getting a lot of body fat off for a specific purpose that we're going to touch on.
Yes. And what's also important when you talk about the mindset is we are trying to take body fat off, but typically, and as we'll discuss in a minute, mini cuts are for people on that long-term physique development. So there's a muscle maintenance goal in there too, right?
Yes.
So you're not crash dieting with the risk of muscle loss. Like a mini cut is intended to like reveal some of the muscle you might be building. So yes, we're trying to take body fat off, but there's this muscle preservation aspect, which I think helps distinguish it from crash diets.
Yes. And I want us to think of, before we continue, I just want us to think of mini cuts are one of those tools that you have in your physique development toolbox. And it's a tool that we don't want to use like all the time, but it is a tool there. And once you learn how to use it, it can be, well deployed in certain contexts.
Yes, absolutely. So if I were to summarize the definition of a mini cut before we kind of go into why we would even do it, it is really important that it is short-term, assertive, but I always think of it as get in and get out. Get in and get out is kind of the mindset I have when it comes to mini cuts. That's how I've talked about it. That's how I've heard you talk about it. That's how I've heard my coach talk about it. Just by thinking about that term, get in, get out, I think it really emphasizes that it's meant to be short term. It's meant to do a job, but then we are meant to move on.
Yeah, I call it robbing the fat bank. I think I actually labeled Steve's training block like robbing the fat bank when he did a very successful mini cut. Perfect example. So yeah, you're getting in, you're stealing the fat, and then you're leaving.
Love it. Love it. We kind of alluded to the fact that they're structured a certain way, but I'd like to just outline specifically some of the boxes we'd check when setting up a mini cut. Let's talk about when we would use it and then how we would structure it. So when we're talking about mini cuts, we just kind of define what they are: short-term, assertive fat loss, robbing the fat bank. When would we even think about using that? And then how would we set up a mini cut properly to do the job?
Yeah. So it's interesting because a lot of people might be surprised by this, but it's actually amidst your long-term building phases. Okay, so there becomes a point in the building phase where maybe, body fat's the cost of doing business when you're in a successful building phase typically, right? And although we do things to mitigate the amount of body fat gain that we do get, you're ultimately still going to gain some body fat. All right. And you should if you're in a productive building phase.
It makes it productive.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, because you can train differently, all these other things that are worth another podcast episode. But just want to say, like, putting on the sweet spot amount of body fat is part of muscle building.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what a mini cut can do, deployed in the right place, is when body fat might be getting a little bit higher than we're comfortable, or a little bit higher than we want, we can deploy a mini cut to very assertively take off some body fat so that we can then get back to building muscle without body fat getting too out of the range that we want to keep it within.
So then when you end your building phase, you're not left with, oh my God, I have all of this body fat I need to take off to get, let's say, as lean as I want to for whatever reason. So it kind of like makes the job to be done in the end a little bit easier too.
Definitely. Yeah. Also, certain things like appetite tends to fall significantly for some people during a building phase. So it can help re-stimulate appetite. Also, it's just a break from, if you're somebody that has to eat a lot of calories in a building phase, it's just a little bit of a break from, feeling like you're stuffing your face all the time. Not everybody has that issue, but for a lot of people, it might, right?
Yeah. So those are some of the benefits that make it perfectly suited for long-term muscle building phases. Let's just flesh out those benefits since we started talking about them before we talk about the structure. So you talked about, obviously like taking off some body fat to make it easier for the long run. Mm-hmm. You talked about appetite. I'd love to double down on that quickly. Sometimes, and from personal experience, right? Like in a building phase, and I'm not somebody who necessarily gets to that point where I feel like I'm like stuffing my face. My calorie targets are not that high. But I do feel like sometimes food enjoyment changes. Like we talk about peanut butter and the difference around peanut butter in a building phase and a cut, right? In a cut, you're like, oh my God, peanut butter is like the best thing I've ever tasted. And when you're in a gaining phase, you're like, I don't really care if I have peanut butter today. I think just sometimes when you then go through a mini cut and you're resetting, for lack of a better word, some of your appetite cues, it also reinstates some of that food enjoyment that encourages you to like slow down, enjoy like tasting every bite again. And I think there's some psychological value in that too.
Yes, definitely. Also, there's certain people that get maybe a little bit too loose in their building phases, and it forces you to reinstate certain habits that will be productive over the long run.
Yes. Okay, Paris, you're like, that's just, you hit that right on the money, right? Because like you get so accustomed to being like, okay, in a building phase, I can be really flexible. I can eat out a little bit more. I can like, loosely track my food, whatever. But then the mini cut just gives you that opportunity to like dial it back in. And I think just the attention to detail comes back to the forefront.
It makes you have your variables more dialed in, like meal timing, meal composition, your sleep, all the variables that maybe you get a little bit lax on in the building phase. It forces you to kind of reinstate those.
And I think because it's shorter term, you kind of learn to appreciate them again. It never feels like it drags on either, right? It's like, oh, I'm really going to appreciate them at this point in time before I get back to building. And now you're back to building with those strong foundations again.
Absolutely.
There is another kind of like psychological benefit that I do want to touch on, which is kind of directly related to physique. It can be really validating. Fat loss does happen quicker than muscle growth. And when you're trying to grow muscle and we don't see that visual validation very quickly. We have to be so patient, right? And so I think just getting a little bit of that positive feedback in your progress metrics can also just really help you feel connected into your longer term journey and feeling confident that you're making progress.
Absolutely. Because sometimes when we're in longer term building phases, we're like, okay, I think I'm building muscle, but we're going to see. And then you take off some body fat and you're like, yeah, I did make some gains. And then it sparks this new motivation so that then you attack the next phase of building hard with that motivation of like, what I'm doing is working. I got that positive reinforcement that I might have been missing.
Absolutely. And on top of that, that positive reinforcement can be productive not just in terms of like motivation or psychology, but in actually guiding your subsequent steps of your next building phase,
Oh, yes,
right?
yes.
Because if you then, like, let's say you take off some body fat and you're like, okay, we did a good job, we can see some visual changes. And I just want to clarify, in case it's not clear to everyone who's listening, when you are leaner, you can see a little bit more muscle definition. And so that's what
A
we're
little
talking
bit,
about.
a lot,
You
a
can see
lot
a
of
lot
it.
more muscle definition. So if you are looking to understand if you have muscle in certain body parts, being lean helps you identify, oh yeah, the muscle's there, or it's bigger than it was before. That's
Yeah.
why we're talking about that.
Yeah. And it really highlights, yeah, your weak areas and your strong areas. So you know what to work on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like if you know, lost a little bit of body fat and you're like, oh, you know what? Actually, like this muscle's not as big as I thought it was, or I did a great job gaining here, but we're falling behind a little bit here. Then you can now apply those learnings to your next building phase and develop your training program in a way that is specifically tailored to prioritizing specific muscle groups. The
Absolutely.
mini cut isn't just about like losing body fat. It's actually about guiding your future muscle growth goals.
100%. 100%.
Yeah. Okay, so we covered off what it is, when they're used, what the benefits are. Now, how do we structure it? So let's say you're working with a client, Paris, and you're like, okay, this person is in this long-term building phase. I've identified that a mini cut would be a good fit for them. We can, give some psychological reprieve. We'll assess their physique at a leaner stage. How would you go about structuring or setting up their mini cut protocol?
Yeah. So first we give a distinct timeline. Okay. So let's say as a perfect example, like take 10 off you in 6 weeks or something like that. Right.
10 pounds.
And 10 pounds. Yeah. In 6 weeks. So let's say we have a bunch of data on a client, right? And we say, okay, we want to take 10 pounds off within a 6 week time frame. Now we know our time frame, it's set, and we know what the objective is. It doesn't always work with perfect math, but we know kind of roughly where we want to head. Then based on the data that we have around calories, steps, these things, we'll set the calories in a way where it's logical that we would fall somewhere around 0.8 to 1.2% of your body weight per week. Like usually for a fat loss phase, we want to be 0.5% of your body weight per week, up to 1% on the aggressive side. So for a mini cut, we probably don't want to be below 0.8% of your body weight per week on average if we're looking for it. But obviously everybody's going to be a little bit different, and depending on your starting body weight, depending on how heavy you are, depending on what we know about the individual, then we were going to
Some
set it up
people's
differently.
bodies like react really quickly too, right?
Yeah.
Like you put them in a deficit week one, they're already dropping. Other people, it needs like 3 weeks for your body to like catch up to
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
signals you're
Yeah.
giving it,
Yeah.
you know?
It's interesting. Yeah. And obviously like the first, for people that hold a lot of water weight, the first week you're going to see a big flush of water too.
So this is why I think though it is really important. I'm going to just say this. We would never start with a client and do a mini cut.
No, 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 no.
Like the mini cut setup, just to your point, is so dependent on the data you have on that person. Yeah. And so it works not just because it's part of long-term strategies, but also having a long-term relationship makes a mini cut not only successful, but I would say like the long-term relationship is like imperative to deploying a mini cut.
Like you need the previous data, and you also have to know that mini cuts are not for people that are beginners. So when looking for a type of client that would do a mini cut in a longer term building phase, like they have previous fat loss experience and they know how to execute a successful fat loss phase, because mini cuts are, theoretically speaking, in practice harder than a normal fat loss phase because you are more assertive. So there will be some hunger and other diet symptoms.
And you have a dedicated timeline. So you
Yeah.
need to adhere to the things you have less, let's say, margin of error, right? Because you're like, we're doing this thing for this designated time, and we've set it up to be just assertive enough to do that thing in that time. So we can't necessarily like deviate from that game plan.
No, exactly. So it's really important to acknowledge that it's not like, oh, I want to lose some fat, I'm going to run a mini cut. Like, no, that's not when you use it.
So let's go back to what we were just talking about when it comes to setting up the structure, right? So you said you'd have a target number of weeks, target rate of loss, all of this is, predicated on the fact that it's somebody you've been working with for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Then how do you move through the mini cut with this person? Like, what are you looking to assess? Are you pivoting at any point?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll talk about before that is even like training wise. Like I actually will scale back volume a little bit because we just don't have the resources to keep up with the recovery demands. You won't be pushing the same volume at the peak of your building phase, eating a ton, than you would in a mini cut. You could also maybe a little bit bro science, but you could potentially resensitize a little bit to a training stimulus by reducing volume. It's the perfect amount of time. So we want like the baseline level of volume that's going to allow us to maintain muscle when we're in an assertive calorie deficit. Okay, so I just wanted to touch on that first before answer
I
your
think that's
question.
really, no, I think that's important because that is part of the setup, right? We said this up front. Mini cuts are part of a long-term muscle building goal. And we need to make sure that by deploying them, we're allowing them to do the job of supporting how we're going to continue to build muscle in the future. We don't want to be losing muscle in this time period. So having the right training dose to maintain is obviously very critical. But also then I would say that probably feeds into how you set calorie targets as well.
Mm-hmm.
And not making sure you're being assertive enough, but not going crazy low that this person can't train with intensity, or, is risking muscle loss because they're not eating enough.
Yeah. And, more experienced dieters, you can go pretty assertive because they know how to train. There's a skill to train in a deficit, and there's a skill to be able to navigate an assertive calorie deficit. That's why the more experience you have, the more assertive you can usually be. But in terms of along the way assessing progress, like progress pics, maybe bi-weekly, and then looking at scale weight and having feedback from the client. But typically we're not actually making any adjustments because you have enough data from working with them for a long period of time to know where to shoot the targets. You know what I mean? So a mini cut, you shouldn't be making adjustments. It's like you set it and forget it type rule.
Yep. Get in, get out.
Yeah,
Do the
get in,
job.
get out.
So because we're getting in, we're doing the job, and we're getting out, I also want to talk about, as part of this idea of like structuring a mini cut, we can't neglect what you do when it ends. That is part of the structure. Typically you go into it having a game plan for what to do next. And I did see something on social media that I didn't think was an effective post mini cut response. I'm not going to get into that, but it did prompt me to think about the fact that mini cuts need as much attention to like what you do after as they need attention to what you do during.
Yeah. I think I know what we're talking about here. Usually you just return to a very similar protocol as you were running before. There's no like reverse walk up the food at 50 calories a week.
That's
There's
a
no
waste of
like,
time.
okay, yeah, you're
That's
wasting
honestly
time.
a waste of time.
Yeah. And you're still in a deficit. Like the goal of the mini cut is not that. It's get in, steal as much fat as you can, right? Robbing the fat bank, get out, and then get right back into productive building.
Right. We need to remember that mini cuts are part of a long-term muscle building physique development journey. So with that in mind, you do not want to take away any opportunity to continue on that long-term physique development muscle growth journey.
Yes.
If you are not going back into muscle gaining, it's okay if you want to maintain. I think that's totally fine. But if you are prolonging a deficit for unnecessary reasons, then you're either not doing a mini cut properly because it's just turning into a longer fat loss phase.
Yes.
Or you're not effectively returning to muscle building.
Yeah. Because you're essentially wasting time, as you said, because it's like we want to get back to building so we can be productive in building. That's the point, right? The mini cut should slingshot you into the next successful stint of building.
Mm-hmm. And are there some people that will do a mini cut and then maintain for a bit? Like, is that something you've encountered? Or is it usually just, okay, we're doing it to, let's say, relieve those appetite challenges, give you confidence in your body again, reacclimatize to different training stimulus, all that? Or is it more just like, we're straight up doing this to keep building?
I think most of the time you should just hop right back into building. The only time where maybe you would maintain for a bit if is for whatever reason, like the client wants to stay leaner for a little bit. But I don't see too much of a logic behind why you would maintain post mini cut, unless this client previously has a history of maybe gaining too fast, right? So then you're like, okay, let's practice maintenance. And sometimes when you put people around maintenance, the body weight just kind of trickles up anyway. So
yeah, that's fair. Like when you're coming out of mini cut and you're like, okay, I'm going to get looser again, right? The only other thing I could think about would be like if somebody's on like a muscle building, this is very specific, but let's say they're on like a muscle building phase and they like want to be good, like look a certain way on vacation, and they had a short-term vacation coming up, you might do a mini cut and then like let them go on vacation, just seek to maintain, and then get
Yeah,
back into,
for sure.
after.
Yeah,
That's the
that's
only
smart.
other
Yeah.
thing, or maybe not vacation, but specific event or like life
Hmm.
thing that they wanted to be leaner for.
Lean forward. Yes. Yes. As long as you acknowledge that might ruin some of the productivity of the building phase. But yeah, totally. If you're like, hey, I want to be a little bit leaner for summer, but I'm not going to do a full cut. I just want to clean things up a bit. Then that's totally fine.
We've done a good job, I think, of explaining like the nuances of mini cuts, right? We
Hmm.
gave you a pretty clear definition up front, but as you can see from how the discussions played out, the structure and how it gets deployed is so context dependent on the individual, but there are clear benefits. And you did allude to this earlier about like who it's best for, but I want to give a designated section to like who we would use mini cuts for versus not. We want to make this very, very clear so that you can apply it to your own case or not.
Yeah. Experienced clients who we have a lot of data for.
That's who it's for.
Yeah. You have a lot of experience. Your adherence is not an issue. We know you can click in, and we also have a lot of data so we can set things up properly.
So it really does depend on that person's experience level. And I think making that, just having confidence, both them having the confidence and you as their coach having the confidence that when you say this is what we need to do, they know exactly how to execute it.
Yeah.
So on the flip side though, and this is not to say that anybody's experience level is insufficient or lacking. We're not pointing that out. We're just saying though, if you are somebody who's still working on understanding how to diet and how to lose body fat, then a mini cut is probably not the best strategy for you. Most likely you would benefit from having a longer term fat loss phase where there's room for learning and a pace that is going to be sustainable, and you can lose at a rate that is comfortable with your lifestyle and sustainable over a period of time. Because you do like learning how to diet should be number one. It should not be like, oh, a mini cut is going to teach me these skills on how to lose fat.
No.
You need to have those skills first. So if you are learning how to deploy strategies for fat loss, do not consider a mini cut. Consider just a lifestyle based fat loss phase.
Yeah. Also, not for people who just finished the cut and rebounded too hard and gained too much body fat. Okay. Because I see that all the time, especially with competitors. They're like, maybe go a little bit too ham on the food post show, or somebody who's gone lean. And then 4 weeks go by and they're like, shoot, I am way too fluffy. And then they try to pull the trigger on a mini cut. Not the time to pull the trigger on the mini cut.
If I may point out, if you just did like a competition prep, you went on stage, you had a 4-week rebound, and then you go back into a mini cut, I'm sorry, but that's yo-yo dieting.
It could lead to binge restrict cycles. Yeah.
Now you're just in this cycle of like not knowing how to have an established baseline, because you start to feel very uncomfortable with any amount of gain, and then you immediately pull back and restrict again. So when we're thinking about setting up a mini cut for somebody, I would almost make the argument that like you have to have been in a building phase for a certain amount of time. I don't have a specific timeline, but you need to have given the building its time.
Yes.
Before just jumping into a mini cut. And this actually leads me to the common mistake and the watch out with mini cuts is it's very tempting to do them too early.
Yeah, or too often. Yeah.
Or too often. Yeah. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it's you need to be starting your mini cut in a place of strength, like good hormonally. You're not anywhere close to have just exited a diet. Like your body fat's at the higher end of where you like to sit within. It's not, I gained a little bit of body fat in my gaining phase, so I need to run a mini cut because I just look a little bit softer. I'm not shredded anymore. Like that's not when you use this tool.
People do commonly get uncomfortable, especially people who have actually gotten very lean before. I'd actually say the leaner you've gotten in the past, the more uncomfortable you can get putting on some body fat.
Absolutely.
And that's like why you pointed out, like with competitors, how they become very tempted to jump into mini cuts very quickly because they know what it looks like to be lean. And there's something satisfying about that look that you worked really hard for. But I think it's important that you see gaining as gaining, right? Like meaning if you are trying to gain muscle, gaining a little bit of cushion around it is part of the process. And we talk a lot about how it's not a free for all. You don't just put on massive amounts of body weight, but you have to let yourself experience a little bit of that discomfort. And recognizing that your subjective discomfort is not the objective discomfort, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And you also have to realize if you've seen yourself very lean, your perception changes for you're going to feel not lean if you're not like that lean. You know what I mean? So even myself, I have to remind myself, like in this building phase, anybody might look at me in the gym and be like, that guy's in pretty good shape. But for me, I look soft just because I've seen myself pretty peeled before. So I keep having to remind myself, and something my coach is big on saying is what he says is like, I'll paraphrase it. The body fat percentage and the look that you're going to be most productive in building muscle in, that's not your favorite outfit. Something like that, right? So it's like, do we want to be very productive in terms of building muscle right now, or do we want to look really good? And sometimes we can have both, sometimes we can't.
And so when it comes to applying that logic to mini cuts, it's like, don't use the mini cut as an exit strategy to embracing some of the discomfort that comes with a gaining phase.
Yeah, because let's get real, it does ruin some of your momentum in your building phase.
It does. It does. It
Right?
takes time away from building.
Building, yeah. So,
like building takes time, and you are now taking away some time, even if that's just 4 weeks. It's time that you are otherwise shifting away, because chances are, if you are that experienced athlete, lifter, whoever that is eligible for mini cuts, chances are you need even more time to build muscle.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Cool. I think that leads us to our conclusion, which is a little bit of a mindset leave behind, let's say. Mini cuts are part of a long-term strategy. They are short-term phases, but they are really best utilized and planned for as part of very long-term goals and very long-term journeys.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, we mean like ones that you've been on for a while and you have that data and that past and you have that like, built up momentum, but then also ones where you're looking forward at a long time horizon as well. So they are not something that is a short-term program. They are not a 4 to 6 week challenge. They are part of a long-term strategy.
Yes. And I'll give myself an example, okay? I've been effectively in a calorie surplus for a year, okay? I was supposed to run a very brief mini cut a little while ago, but had a health situation that prevented me from being able to pull that off. But I am just about to run that. That one, we kind of just postponed it a little bit, right? And then I'm still going to have another like 4 months of building after that mini cut before I start my competition prep. So if you think about that time horizon, that's like a year and a half. And then we have a quick, mini cut within that, but it's part of the long-term structure that's been built.
For sure. I would say I'll share my similar example just to double down on it, because it works for dudes and females. If I think about when I really started my proper gaining phase, like hired a coach to gain muscle type deal, it was like November 2023. Okay, so we're coming up on 2 years. Mm-hmm. And we did a mini cut just shy of a year in. So we built for like 10 months. Then we did a mini cut, but we actually stopped it a little shorter because I was going through big life changes, right? Like leaving my job and stuff like that. So we stopped it and then we kind of redeployed it. So similar to you, right? Like you have to have that agility along the way as well.
Yes. Yeah.
You have to have that agility because things don't always go to plan, even when you plan so meticulously. But what we just did is like, we just tried it again, right? We tried it again. We planned for 6 to 8 weeks. We ended up using the 8 because my body was a little bit slower in the first couple of weeks. Like we were saying earlier, everybody responds differently. First couple of weeks, a little bit slower. Also had some like travel back to Ontario mixed in there and all that kind of stuff. But then in the last half, like things accelerated and I was subjectively still feeling really good. I had just gotten a lot of stress off my shoulders. So we saw really good progress. So we said, okay, let's go for these. Let's add another 2 weeks. We're feeling good. And then we go back to building. And so now I've been building ever since then, which was like, when was that? Like March or something? So in that, like in the almost 2 years, let's call it 22 months. Okay. Mm-hmm. In 22 months, I've maybe spent the total of somewhere between 2 and 3 months actually in a deficit just from mini cuts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like this is long-term planning in action.
Yeah.
Definitely exactly. Long-term planning. And I'm back on building for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, it takes time to build a good foundation of muscle, especially if you're not like somebody who looks at a weight and packs on muscle. Like we're not like that, right?
No, unfortunately, that just doesn't work for our gene pool that you and I are both part of.
We have other benefits, but or if you're like a natural lifter, things just don't happen at the same timeline, right? Like what we're talking about now is like, it's natural bodybuilding or natural physique development, whatever you want to call it.
Exactly. But I just think it's really important that the ratio between the amount of time you spend cutting, whether that's longer term cutting phases, competition prep, or mini cuts, the ratio between that amount of time and your building phase, the more advanced you get, the ratio should shift in towards much more time being in the building phases, which is why mini cuts can be important, because they're short amounts of time that you're investing in cutting. But it's important to not let them become too frequent or too elongated, so that they take away from that building time.
100%. I love it. Cool.
I think we said a few of the same things a few times over the course of this podcast, but I think it's good. We hope that today's episode helped clear up what is a mini cut and helped you evaluate kind of the pros and cons, the benefits, and when they're best utilized. It may be for you, might not be. If you are looking for long-term physique development, that's honestly what we do best. So please drop a comment below if you're interested in chatting. Find us on Instagram. And if you have used mini cuts before, we would love to hear about how they've worked for you, how they've been part of your long-term journeys, and how you found success with them. So please drop a comment below. We will be back in your feeds next Monday with another episode of Truth Talks. So if you haven't subscribed, please click that subscribe button. Make sure you don't miss out on what's to come.
Awesome. Yeah, hit that subscribe button. That would mean a lot to us.
It really would. We appreciate it. It's probably the easiest way you can show us your support if you took any value out of this episode or any of our episodes. Simple click, but like Para said, means the world to us. So if you have subscribed already, we just want to say thank you as well. All right, so that's it for this week. Like I said, we'll be back in your feeds next Monday with another episode of Truth Talks. In the meantime, have an amazing week ahead. Bye for now.
Take care.